What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Stamina Warden DPS. So the Stamina Warden still remains as the second strongest Stamina DPS in the game right now, right behind the Stamina Necromancer. Stamina Necromancer is still on top, mainly because of the fact that their Pestilent Colossus ultimate provides major vulnerability, but the Stamina Warden has an added advantage of having a little bit more cleave than the Stamina Necromancer on average, mainly due to the fact that Subterranean Assault is a pretty wide AoE, and it hits pretty hard as well. So for those of you guys who do not have access to the Necromancer class, but do have access to the Warden class, Wardens are going to be the best DPS for stamina users out there. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, pretty much everything you need to know to recreate this build yourself. This is going to be a Monster Helm set build, unlike some of the other builds that I have for Stamina DPS, which are Maelstrom builds. You can, of course, go with the Maelstrom build instead of a Monster Helm build here with the Stamina Warden, but I found that at the very least on a static single target test on the raid dummy, that the Monster Helm did end up doing a little bit better, but both were very close to each other, so realistically you can go with either. So I will be discussing the setup for both of them in this video, although in the description you will only find the setup for the Monster Helm setup here. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here with our gear. So, like I said, this is a Monster Helm setup here, so we will be using a Maarselok, which is currently the best Monster Helm set in the game for Stamina DPS. This does come from, predictably, the Lair of Maarselok dungeon, so you do need to have access to the latest Scalebreaker DLC in order to grab this set. Now, this set, the one piece is not quite as strong as Velidreth, so max stamina is going to be weaker on a Stamina DPS compared to a weapon damage armor bonus. The two-piece has the potential to be even stronger than what Velidreth is able to provide. So Velidreth would be the other Monster Helm set that you could potentially use in place of Maarselok. However, Velidreth was changed in Scalebreaker so that no matter how large the boss's hitbox is, only one spore will ever hit at a time. And so Maarselok came along and kind of usurped Velidreth. So right off the bat, it deals 10,800 disease damage to enemies over 4 seconds, but this damage is increased by 5% for each negative effect the enemies have, up to 150 additional damage. What this basically means is, if you're in an organized raid group and you have the tanks, the healers, all your support roles basically putting on a lot of negative effects, you have things like burning, poison, your Double Ravage Health poison, Rending slashes on the boss, you can stack up a lot of that 5% and you'll be pretty much sitting at the very least 100% additional damage to 20 negative effects. Negative effects in this instance does not refer necessarily to debuffs like Major Fracture or Major Breach. It also refers to basically anything that shows up on either Strendar or combat metrics as a debuff. So things like Double Ravage Health poisons, those are counted as debuffs. The Rending slashes bleed counts as a debuff. The axe bleed from dual wield or two-handed also counts as a debuff. So those would each add on to the additional 5% damage. Hence why Maarselok has the potential to out DPS Velidreth fairly quickly. It is also on command, so the proc condition is when you bash, which does have a downside of being a little bit more difficult to sustain. But because of this sort of controllable proc, you're able to try to hit as many things as you can, versus Velidreth, where it just procs on any damage dealt, so you don't really have as much control over Velidreth as you do with Maarselok. Both Monster Helm sets are very strong, but Maarselok is going to out DPS Velidreth here. For our first body set, we're going to go with Relequen, as you can expect. No other set has really been introduced in the game that out DPSs Relequen in terms of raw single target DPS. This comes from Cloudrest, so you do need to have access to that trial if you wanted to run this set here. Now Relequen is very strong for single target DPS, but lacks a little bit in cleave damage, so we'll be going over some other sets that you might want to have on hand in place of Relequen for those sort of AoE fights. Our second set is going to be Lokkestiiz. This comes from the Sunspire trial. So this is definitely still the strongest stamina set in the game paired with Relequen, mainly because that Major Slayer bonus is a very strong bonus to have. So with just a single synergy, you are able to maintain, assuming you activate a synergy every 20 seconds, 75% uptime Major Slayer, and with 2 synergies, as long as you stagger them appropriately, you should be able to get 100% uptime on Major Slayer this way. In most organized raid groups, you will have a chance to have 2 or more synergies. Typically speaking, you will have some other DPS spec running a synergy, or the healers will be running multiple different synergies, so that way you'll be able to get multiple synergies going on here. Now, because we're running a Monster Helm set, you do want Lokkestiiz to be on the front bar here on your dual wield bar, so just keep in mind that whenever you activate synergies, it has to be on your dual wield bar rather than your bow bar back bar. Now, if you're not running Relequen, you could obviously run Lokkestiiz as a full body set, so jewelry and body if you'd like, in which case it doesn't really matter which bar you activate the synergy on. Most setups here, for single target, you'll be running something like Relequen Lokkestiiz, but for AoE setups, you would typically be running something like Lokkestiiz in a second set. And then we'll be going over, again, a couple other sets that you might want to pick up if you don't have access to Sunspire. For the back bar, we're no longer using the Maelstrom Bow, mainly because of changes that were made to Endless Hail and Arrow Barrage. We will now be using the Master's Bow instead, so this is going to be infused with weapon damage enchant. Luckily, this means that everybody is able to get access to the best bow in the game. This comes from Dragonstar Arena, which is going to be very long, and it is a 4-man arena, so you do have 4 times the chances to get the Master's Bow drop. But you no longer need to run the Maelstrom Arena for the Maelstrom Bow for raw single target DPS. I would still recommend you get the Maelstrom Bow, mainly because it is still going to be the strongest AoE damage potential, but the Masters is going to be stronger for raw single target DPS. For our weapons, we're going with 1 dagger and 1 axe here, 1 not sharpened, and Nirnroot on the main hand, so it's always going to be sharpened on the offhand here. We are still using Double Ravage Health poisons because single weapon enchants are not very strong, so we're still sticking with Double Ravage Health poisons here. For jewelry, sticking with 3 Bloodthirsty, you can also go with Infused if you'd like. Robust is not going to be as strong compared to either of those 2 traits, but if you do not have access to any sort of jewelry crafting, so you can't transmute your jewelry, then you'll have to stick with Robust. So Bloodthirsty is the best, followed closely behind by Infused. We're going with all medium pieces here, so you can see that we have medium Maarselok arm cops and medium Maarselok max. We're going 7 medium, mainly because the medium armor passives do give us some additional crit chance for every medium piece we have here. If you want a little bit more survivability, then you can swap out one of your Monster Helm sets pieces with a heavy set if you'd like, so either heavy shoulders or heavy helm. All divines and all max stamina enchant. If you want some additional survivability, you can swap out one enchant for a health enchant, or you can shift some attribute points into health if you prefer. In terms of other sets that you're going to want to have on hand to hold on to, starting off first with dungeon sets. First set I want to talk about is going to be Leviathan. This comes from Crypt of Hearts, so this is a base game set. This is essentially the stamina version of Mother's Sorrow. Just gives you a bunch of weapon crit, and in this particular DPS meta, with basically focusing in on maximizing your critical damage modifier, Leviathan is a very strong set here. So things like Lokkestiiz with Leviathan is definitely a pretty decent combination here, but you will need to farm for this set. You cannot buy it off for guild traders. Moving on from there, the only other set that I would probably talk about, would pick up I should say, is going to be Tsagvin's Warband. This is particularly useful because the 4-piece does give you some additional physical penetration, so that makes it particularly strong in sort of AoE fights, as well as if you ever want to run a 2-handed build, because you will not have access to both Nirnroot and Sharpened with a 2-handed weapon. The additional weapon crit that you get from Tsagvin's is also very nice here. The 5-piece is basically a slightly modified version of Advancing Yokeda, so you get 1,290 weapon crit as opposed to 2,000 from Advancing Yokeda, and you also get minor force, so you don't really need to worry too much about maintaining Barbed Trap if you're running Tsagvin's Warband. That being said, you will still be running the Trap just because it's a pretty good DPS move, but you don't have to necessarily worry about losing some uptime on it because you will always have that minor force from Tsagvin's. Going over some overland sets, there are a handful of decent overland sets to pick up. First one is going to be Spriggan's Thorns. This gives you additional physical penetration, so this is useful for trash fights because you might not be able to get that major fracture on everything. Now on a Stamina Warden, this set is not going to be quite as strong as compared to on some other classes, mainly because your Subterranean Assault ability will apply major fracture to everything. So you will be able to get Major Fracture on everything as a Stamina Warden, but other classes might see better use of Spriggan's Thorns. Moving on from there, you do have Briarheart, which comes from Hrothgar. So this is a pretty decent set because you can wear this as a front bar set because it is a proc, so it will carry over to your back bar here. Even though the 5-piece, when you do the actual math on the uptime, does end up being about as strong as Hunding's Rage, because it is a proc, it does carry over to your back bar, which makes it a little bit better than Hunding's Rage here. Also improve your survivability just a little bit by giving you a little bit of a small heal whenever you deal critical damage. Finally, under trial sets, there are a handful of good trial sets to hold on to. First one's going to be Twice Fanged Serpent. Basically sort of fits that same niche as Spriggan's Thorns in AoE fights, just gives you additional physical penetration, which you might not need as a Stamina Warden. But there's always the instances where Crusher's not going to be on everything, Alkosh might not be on everything, so it's always nice to kind of pad your physical resistance, physical penetration a little bit for trash fights. Next is War Machine. This plays very well with the Stamina Warden because you will be using the Bear ultimate, which only costs 75 ultimate. So War Machine, much like Lokkestiiz, grants you Major Slayer, but it's whenever you use an ultimate ability rather than a synergy. In addition, it also gives 2 closest allies to you Major Slayer as well for 10 seconds. On average, you'll be able to get probably around 40 to 45% uptime on Major Slayer if you're able to activate your synergy, activate your ultimate on cooldown. So it's going to be noticeably worse than Lokkestiiz, but you also give it to other people, which does provide a little bit of additional group DPS as well. This does come from the Hall's Fabrication trial, so you will need to have access to Vardenfell to farm for the set. Vicious Serpent is the final set I want to talk about here. This is a base game set which comes from all the 3 Kra'gh trials, and it gives you a nice reduction to your stamina ability cost, which might help out if you're having a little bit of trouble sustaining yourself. Now, way back, maybe about 1.5 years to 2 years ago, Vicious Serpent was a very nice set to run on the front bar, but because of the introduction to some various other sets, all the dungeon DLCs, all the expansions, it's no longer quite as potent as it used to be, but it's still a strong set if all you have access to is the base game sets. Finally, I do want to touch upon Advancing Yokeda, which is a heavy armor set from Helra Citadel. Base game set here, but because it is heavy armor, you will need to have access to Somerset in order to transmute your jewelry pieces to an appropriate trait. Because it's heavy, basically what that means is your jewelry will only come in the healthy trait. It will not come in Bloodthirsty, it won't come in Infused unless you transmute it to those 2 traits. So in order to make the best use out of Advanced Yokeda, you will need to have access to Somerset. Now, Advanced Yokeda increases your critical strike rating by 400 up to 5 times, so up to a maximum of 2000 for 6 seconds whenever you deal melee damage. Now, you will wear this on the front bar set because it is a proc, so it will carry over to your back bar. Because we're on a Stamina Warden as well, you will be able to basically maintain a full 100% uptime, or close to 100% uptime on Advanced Yokeda, because we will be swapping back to our front bar every 3 abilities in order to get Subterranean Assault going. But those are pretty much all the sets that I wanted to talk about. And very quickly, for those guys who are unfamiliar with Velidreth here, let's go ahead and touch upon Velidreth. Velidreth does come from Cleave Shadows, so you do need to have access to the Shadows of the Hiss DLC. But like I mentioned, the 1-piece weapon damage is going to be stronger than Maarselok's max stamina. The 2-piece is pretty good in the fact that you don't really have to worry about activating it at all. It just sort of passively goes off. But it did get a nerf in Scalebreaker where the disease spores will not hit an enemy more than once. If you don't have access to any of the DLC dungeons though, you can run Selene's instead. This comes from Selene's Web, as you can imagine. The 1-piece is still max stamina, and then the 2-piece, whenever you deal direct melee damage, you have a chance to basically call upon a bear that mauls the closest enemy to you for a certain amount of physical damage. This does have a faster cooldown, a lower cooldown I should say, compared to Maarselok and Velidreth, so you can proc it very quickly. However, unlike Maarselok and Velidreth, it is single target only, so it kind of has that weakness behind it, but Selene's is still a very strong set to run if you only have access to base game dungeons. Moving on to our character sheet, I am a Dark Elf. Dark Elves are going to be one of the better races when it comes to stamina DPS. The strongest race mathematically would be the Orcs. The orcs get 2000 max stamina, they also get a little bit of max health, 1000 max health, and 258 additional weapon damage. Dark elves still get the 258 weapon damage, but they only get 1875 max stamina. Now the advantage of running a Dark Elf is that you also get 1875 max magicka and 258 additional spell damage, so if for whatever reason you also have to play a Magicka Warden, for example you might be going into Cloud Rest progression, then you can just basically swap over to a Magicka DPS without needing to race change or rank another character. So pretty nice if you kind of want to flip-flop between a Stamina or Magicka DPS. Moving on from there, there are a few other races that you can run as a Stamina DPS, what I like to call the regen races, the Stain races. You have Red Guards, Wood Elves, and the Imperials if you have access to the Imperial Edition. All three of those races get 2000 max stamina, but they do not get 258 weapon damage. Instead, they get passives that sort of boost, as you can anticipate, their sustain. Wood Elves get 258 additional stamina regen. Red Guards get 990 stamina back whenever they deal direct damage every few seconds. And Imperials get a little bit less, they get about 330 magic health and stamina back whenever they deal damage every few seconds. But on top of that, they also get 3% additional cost reduction to all abilities across the board, so it does help out sustain a little bit there. Finally, a jack of all trades race that you might want to consider running if you want to dabble a little bit in tanking and healing would be the Khajiits. They get 825 magicka health and stamina, 85 magicka and stamina regen, 100 health regen, and they get 10% additional critical healing done and critical damage done. So a little bit of everything here with the Khajiits, basically kind of making a very good jack of all trades, allowing you to flip-flop between all the different roles fairly flexibly, although you will not necessarily be the best in any of those roles. In terms of our attributes, we have all points into stamina here. Now you will notice that my health is on the low side, and that's mainly because we are using parse foods. That way you can get accurate representation across the different stamina DPS races. In terms of overall sustain has gone up for stamina DPS because we are using Soul Trap, which does use magicka, so you might be able to get away with blue food, buy stat food, max health, max stamina. If you still need a sustain though, you can run something like Artaeum Takeaway Broth or Dubious Command Throne, or that way you get the max health, the max stamina, and the stamina regen. Just keep in mind that with Artaeum Takeaway Broth and Dubious Command Throne, you will have to shift some points into health here, just because you will not be getting as much health as you would be if you're running something like blue food. Alternatively, you can also put some points into health or take a couple of health glyphs onto your armor. It's kind of up to you how you want to meet that. General rule of thumb is to hit about 16.5 to 17k max health before you get toughness and before you get Ebon. That'll bump you up to an appropriate level of health for vet trials. Moving on. We are using the Shadow Mundus. Nothing has changed from Mundus Stone, so as you can anticipate, we're still running the Shadow. And then, like I mentioned, we're running Lavafoot, Soup, and Sultrus, just so that way we can get an accurate comparison across the different stamina DPS, because I will be using this food across all the stamina DPS builds. This gives us max stamina and stamina regen. This gives us a good idea of an actual in-raid scenario where we're going to be getting multiple synergies, so we get multiple chances to get some additional regen from our Undaunted passives. Next are skill bars. So again, this is a Monster Helm setup, so if we're running a Maelstrom setup here, you'd be running something like the Maelstrom Axe and Dagger up here, again Nirn, Sharpened, and then we'd be running, instead of Maarselok, you'd be running Lokkestiiz, Helm and Shoulders. So for a Monster Helm setup, we have Rending Slashes, Cutting Dive, Subterranean Assault, Silver Shards, Barbed Trap, Wild Guardian. If we're running a Maelstrom setup, instead of Cutting Dive, we'd be running Rapid Strikes instead. On our back bar, this remains the same across both types of builds. Soul Trap, Consuming Soul Trap if you want a single target, Splitting Soul Trap if you want an AoE target, Poison Injection, Arrow Barrage, Bull Netch, Barbed Trap, and Wild Guardian. Again, we do have to double bar the bear here in order to maintain bear across both bars. And again, Cutting Dive is here for the Monster Helm setup. Rapid Strikes will replace Cutting Dive with a Maelstrom setup. Under the champion points now, TP cap is still 810. Nothing has changed with CP so far. So that gives us 270 points to put across each of our different constellation types. Starting with green CPs, 100 Mood Cap, 75 Tenacity, 31 Shadow Word, 31 Tumbling, and 33 Warlord. The only real thing that I would say is necessary here is the 100 into Moon Calf. You can shift points out of Tenacity if you are not having any issues with sustain, you're not heavy attacking at all. So it's kind of up to you where you want to put your green CPs. As for our blue CPs, we have 59 into Mighty, 60 into Piercing, 61 into Precise Strikes, 56 into Thaumaturge, and 44 into Master at Arms. Now, if we're running a Monster Helm set build, you can shift 4 points out of Thaumaturge, dropping down 52, and put 4 points into Master at Arms, or you can even drop it further to 48 and 52, but this is probably going to be the best setup for you. Now, do keep in mind that we have 60 into Piercing because we are assuming that we have Infused Thorax Crusher, Alkosh, Minor Fracture, Major Fracture, all of our debuffs are active and we have good uptimes on them. If you're missing any of those debuffs, or you're running something like Sovereign's Warband where you have an additional physical penetration bonus, you will need to shift your points around Piercing. So if you're running something like Sovereign's, or you're running double sharpened weapons, for example, you're obviously going to take some points out of sharpened or Piercing, so that way you are not over penetrating. You decide to do that, just keep in mind to try to hit your jump points. So for example, Mighty, the next jump point from 49 would be 56. Next jump point for Precise Strikes here would be 66, and so on and so forth. Just make sure you're hitting your jump points if you do need to play around a little bit with Piercing CPs. Finally, our red CPs for a balanced approach here to mitigation. We have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick Skin, and 64 on both Hardy and Elemental Defender. So that's all of the build information. Now let's go ahead and talk about our rotation. So the two rotations here are going to be very different. So we'll start off with the Monster Helm rotation, and then we'll swap over to the Maelstrom setup so I can show you the Maelstrom rotation. Final parse we'll be doing will be on the Monster Helm set rotation though. So general rule of thumb here is for the Monster Helm set rotation is basically more or less, I'll do it on the 20 million dummy and just reset it later. It's basically to center yourself around Subterranean Assault. And luckily for us, you can pretty much make a more or less static rotation with a Monster Helm setup. With the Maelstrom setup, it's going to be a little bit trickier to do. So you will not necessarily be able to center your rotation around Subterranean Assault. You will need a Maelstrom setup because you will be optimizing around doing rapid strikes. So why don't I just show you guys what I mean. So for the Monster Helm setup here, you can see here, every third ability, you'll be using Subterranean Assault. And the way that the timing works out, you'll always be doing 2 abilities on your back bar. And you'll always be able to end your front bar rotation on Subterranean Assault. So this is what I mean when I say it's a static rotation. So you can see what I mean here. So that's more or less the Monster Helm setup. So basically, the beginning is going to be a little bit weird because obviously you're getting all your dots active and things like that. But once you have all your dots going, go ahead and reset the dummy here. Basically what happens is you do all your rotations here. You should say, the best way to think about this is ending your front bar rotation. You end it with a Subterranean Assault, you go to your back bar, you do Arrow Barrage, Soul Trap, swap to your front bar here, because now you just did Subterranean Assault, 2 abilities, which means the next ability should be Subterranean Assault. Do Subterranean Assault, you go back to your back bar, and then you do either Bull Netch or Barb Trap, depending on whether this is your first time around or your second time around. Basically, you're going to be flip-flopping between the 2 of them, and then end with Poison Injection. At that time, it's time to do another Subterranean Assault, so you swap to your front bar, Subterranean Assault, then you do Rending Slashes, Cutting Dive, or Rending Slashes, your ultimate. And by that time, that's 2 or more abilities, then you do Subterranean Assault, at which point, Arrow Barrage has pretty much run out, so you repeat yourself all over again. Maelstrom setup is going to be a little bit trickier to do. So really quickly, let's just go ahead and equip the Maelstrom setup here. The Maelstrom setup, something like this. Swap these out here, and you'd be running something like the Lokkestiiz or whatever your second 5-piece set is in place of your Monster Helm set, and then you'd be running Rapid Strikes instead of Cutting Dive here. This one's going to be a little bit trickier. So again, starting things off here is going to be a little bit weird. I think I screwed that up a little bit here, but the general rule of thumb is you always want to end your rotation, front bar rotation, on a rapid strike. So let's start this again, see if I can get this right. So we'll start with the rapid strikes. And then instead of doing Subterranean Assault, you always want to end and continue to pull through your entire back row rotation. With rapid strikes. Like so. And because you do have a trap double Barbed here, you can do trap on the front bar instead. That way you can always end your front bar rotation with rapid strikes, allowing you to get that poison injection buff to your, I should say, a buff to your poison injection from the Cruel Flurry buff. It's a little bit trickier there with the Maelstrom setup here, mainly because you want to kind of make sure you're ending your front bar rotation with rapid strikes. You should be able to get the poison injection off and get the Cruel Flurry buff that way. But we will be doing instead of the Maelstrom setup, we will be doing the Monster Helm setup instead. That's going to be with the Monster Helm set and with Lokkestiiz as our dual wield front bar set, and we will be using Cutting Dive rather than Rapid Strikes here. This should give you a good idea of where Stamina Wardens stand in comparison to other DPS classes. Now, like we did see two setups here. Both of them will be pulling very, very similar DPS. So with the Maelstrom setup, I pulled around 90k. With this setup, the Monster Helm setup, pulling also around 90.5k or so. On average, the Monster Helm setup was doing a little bit better, but it was very fluctuating between the two of them, so you realistically can do either setup here. So let's go ahead and get started here with our parse here. Now in terms of when to use Maarselok, I typically will always use it when I do go to my front bar for the first time, so you saw it there. For example, here, this is where I use Maarselok. And that just works out because by the time you finish your entire back bar rotation and have all your dots going, cooldown will be in effect. Here, this is pretty much a static rotation. A little bit of a lag spikes here and there. And we are going to be overcasting Bull Netch as a result of this rotation. yes, one more thing that I do want to mention here with the Maarselok parse is that you will not be doing as much DPS with Maarselok on a solo parse as we would in an actual raid. Mainly because we're not getting as many negative debuffs on a solo parse as we would in an actual raid. In execute, our rotation itself doesn't change because we don't have an execute ability. Technically it's just a bear, but our bear is obviously not a spamble. There we go, that is the Stamina Warden parse here. Again, a Monster Helm setup here. We pulled just shy of 90k. I have pulled a little bit over 90k in the past here, but I think I missed a Major Slayer proc on the back bar and a little bit of lag here and there, as well as potentially some crit RNG, possibly just because Relequen and Maarselok don't crit, so our crit is going to be lower over here, but there might be some crit RNG here. Top Assault is definitely below average, as is Poison Injection is definitely below average, and I was missing a few Poison Injections, and Rending Slash's Bleed was also below average. So a little bit of crit RNG here to kind of account for the little bit of loss in DPS. But overall, you can see here that Maarselok, even without any sort of additional debuffs from a tank or a healer, still doing fairly noticeable DPS, a little bit more than Velidreth would be. With some additional debuffs, it would probably be a little bit higher, maybe not as high as Rending Slash's Bleed, but definitely be above Crushing Swipes here. So as you can see, Stamina Wardens, second strongest stamina DPS in the game right now, right underneath the Stamina Necromancer. So that's going to be it for this build video. If you guys have any questions about this build, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.